broken heart.
Simon's outlook on life is really inspirational.
Of a lost love. Today's never his best, and yesterday's just passed through. And I ask, did he say why he came? Did you hear what he said? Did he say where he's going? 'Cause he's just somewhere in the middle. In the middle.
Hi, I'm Simon Dillon. I have a kidney transplant. I'm deaf. I'm also a nurse and a lawyer. I've got a little experiment to do with you today before we start off, and that is on each of your seats you would have found some earplugs. I'm going to make all of you deaf for about 10 minutes and then bring you back. It's just a little experiment to show you what I'm going through up here, because I have hearing aids in, and most people who don't have hearing aids obviously don't get what it's like to stand up and speak to a group of people. So I'll give you an idea of what it sounds like. So if you can pop those in, don't look silly because I've got giant plugs in my ears. Okay. If you've got hearing aids, you're naturally exempt. Okay. You should have you should be a bit muted now. Okay, now, can you still hear me? Is it muted? Okay. Okay, I wasn't speaking then. Okay, so I'll try something else. Have you enjoyed it today? Can you hear me better? Okay. Well, you can take them out now. The idea is to actually show you that even with hearing aids, we don't hear normally. It's a muted sound. Sometimes it sounds like, for me, when I speak to you and you speak to me, it's going to sound like I'm speaking through I can hear you through a PA system, and that's probably the better way to sound it. So, yeah, it's an unusual experience for me up here. It probably is just as much experience for you to watch the talks today. I've got a note folder pad thingo here today, and as a nurse, that's sort of kind of really, I like it, you know. So in the old days, nurses used to have these and walk around the wards and things like that, but that's stopped now. They've gone to computers, but they were really good because they could obviously use them. And when I worked, I was a bit of a, you know, in the early days when you start, you think you're a bit of a Clint Eastwood, and you know, you'd use your folder, and the folder was good for writing stuff and holding. It was also good for threatening. You're reading something. It's also good for implicit threats. It tended to work quite well, actually, and nurses tend to use these quite a bit for writing. Obviously, those days are gone. Occasionally, we're thrown at people who kept playing with their text phones. Okay. So that's merely just an example of impairment. The worst thing people can do when they speak to someone who's deaf is yell at them, and it's quite common that people will yell at you. That makes it worse. The other thing too is, I can't hear in the dark. I know it sounds strange, doesn't it? I often say that to people and they look at me like, something wrong with me. There is something wrong with me. But I can't hear you in the dark. So when you speak to me, if I go to a function or something like that, I need lights on because I need to see your face. I need to see what you're saying. I need to see your facial expression. And that's really tough, you know, because I've actually come from hearing and I've gone deaf. So you notice the difference. You become part of the community and then you become sort of slightly excluded. That's not to feel sorry for yourself. You should get out there and continue to have a shot. But it does make it a little bit tougher. Again, if there's anybody out there who has trouble hearing me today, I don't actually do sign language either. So we can stare at each other for 18 minutes. It's a bit of a nice way to finish it off. No pressure on me, of course. So I also have a syndrome. It's called Alport syndrome. And what that is there's lots of diseases and syndromes and things like that. But in all of us, in our kidneys, we have a glomerulus. And what that does is that's part of the filter system inside us. And that gets rid of all the things like toxins and things like that. In your kidneys, you have a collagen cell basically within there. It helps, it replaces itself, if you like, for want of a better word. And as fluid or blood flushes through there over a period of time, it gets scarred. Your kidneys replace that collagen cell. My kidneys don't. I don't replace it. So I just scar up, and they stop working. Once they stop working, I go on to dialysis or peritoneal dialysis or something like that, and that essentially does what my kidneys can't do. It's very basic, it's very primitive. I have a 50-50 chance of getting this, so I'm not a betting man. I lost that one. How I became sick, it was very subtle. It's a subtle onset. Then all of a sudden it's very serious, very quick. So you'll go from running around doing well things and you start feeling nauseous, you start feeling sick, headaches, all these sort of things. I was 24 years old when this happened. And really, I had no idea what was about to come after that because I walked into a doctor's surgery, did some blood tests. He said, okay, you're going to need dialysis and a transplant. I'll see you later. Make an appointment next week. So it's a bit hard to absorb, but you get past that. Initially, when I found out, I started working myself as a registered nurse in intensive care units. I did work alongside Queensland Rescue up in northern Queensland. And these are pretty tough environments, the best of times to work in. So even when you're well, you can go home, you can have nightmares, the smells. I mean, some terrible things happen to people that you couldn't possibly imagine. And these places are just full of it. It's quite an emotionally taxing environment. You see all sorts of age groups, all sorts of things happening. There's upsetting stories. You take your work home with you. Sometimes you have nightmares. And this goes for all the staff that work in these areas. It is quite a tough environment. I particularly found it tough when some of the people I was looking after actually had the same illness as me, and that was quite confronting. Some of those people actually died on me, and I had to confront some of those families and help them. That's a tough experience. It tests your mentality, it really does. Sometimes that's a very lonely experience too, because you feel you're going through something nobody else can understand you. Probably one of the better things I come across in working places like intensive care units was the fact that, and money couldn't buy this, but this brings it back to the basics, is that you look after someone and you get to know their family, and all of a sudden they bring you into their inner circle. They didn't know you, you're just a staff member in a hospital. You'd turn up at your shift and they would hug you, this lady, this man, this sister, daughter, brother. They would give you a kiss on the cheek and say thank you for coming. At the same time, you're feeling guilt. I mean, you're looking after someone who's horribly sick, they could die, very well die. And it looks messy, they're covered in tubes and all sorts of awful things. They're on a ventilator. So you're interacting with this family in this daily environment, so you become very attached to these people. And at the same time, you can't get attached. You've got to remain objective. You've got to keep doing your thing. But they let you into these personal, private spaces. You feel incredibly privileged. It's a place where you can go to work every day, but it's beyond money. You can't buy these positions. They take you in. It's a very special place, I think. On one occasion, I was greeted by someone, and I felt very privileged and very humble to have this. But I remember that we were waking the patient up, and this gentleman actually sat up and had a bit of a tear in his eye, and I came over and I gave him a hug. And that to me was just such, I didn't feel going to work. It was not going to work for me sometimes. It was just that made my day, things like that. So I found it was a very special job. When I started dialysis, and when I was still nursing intensive care at the same time, I would leave work and go to the unit where many of my colleagues would come up to the intensive care unit to dialyse patients. So it was a bit of a funny position there. I'd go down, have dialysis, and I'd meet them back up the unit to dialyse patients. Really strange idea. I think I'm the only one that had ever gone through it. I used to drive to work sick in the morning, being sick on the side of the road, and then continue to the intensive care unit. And this would go on all the time. And I just thought, this is never ending. It's going to get worse. It's going to get worse. You know, it's not like a cold. You know, you had all these awful side effects. It was emotionally, it was physically, I think it was financially collapsing around me. Things were collapsing around me. You know, it was a pretty tough place. I was paying rent. I still had to pay rent. At one point, I almost became homeless because the treatments are time-consuming. They're expensive. It becomes a very basic way of life. It's almost an existence. There's nothing else. You're just consumed by illness and consumed by treatment, and it just moves in this circle. And you go to work, and that's it. At that time, I started becoming deaf as well. I've had tinnitus. The tinnitus gets worse. Now I have pulsating tinnitus, so you get a hum, like a when you're a little bit tired, you get a So you jump like you're being scared sometimes, but it can go on. It can drive you mad. I think actually Van Gogh had a problem with tinnitus himself. There's no cure for it. You just wear it. Some noises for other people are louder. It goes 24/7. It doesn't stop. The only way you can get rid of it is to hear a noise louder than it. So you sleep with it, you eat with it, you relax with it. It's there for life. There's no medication, nothing like that. It's a really annoying thing to have, actually. Also, the other thing with it too is apparently what happens is you go looking for sound. As you become deaf, your brain actually goes looking for sound. So it hones in on things like that. It looks for sound. Actually, one of the treatments, which I thought was a bit crappy, really, was to stick this machine by your bed and it plays the seaside. So you've got this waves pulsating. I thought, not for me. So I just listen to it now. Sometimes you can hum to it. Sometimes you get a bit of a harmony going. It presents some interesting ideas and some awkward situations. The other thing is, I notice that some people don't want to speak to you because you are deaf. They have trouble understanding that. I'm pretty approachable because I either listen or I just don't hear you, so it doesn't matter either way. And I don't have the problem. Everybody else has the problem. Because if I can't hear, well, then there's no problem. So I was on a dialysis machine anyway, and you saw some pictures up there, and I really wanted to show what it does to your body. I weighed 63 kilo. I was on dialysis 4.5 years. It's a horrific treatment. It's nasty. It's painful. It's highly time-consuming. It's expensive. The drugs are expensive. So what I did today is I brought a kidney along. Some people may have seen one of these. This is actually a man-made kidney. It's basically, that's what it is anyway. So what happens is this attaches to a machine, to a circuit. Blood flows from your arm, which I have a fistula here, which they used to take blood out. They don't do it anymore. The blood flows into this machine, into this pipe here, comes out the other end. In the middle sections, through all the little tubes in there, is a fluid. And the fluid moves around, and by osmosis, it takes out the chemicals, electrolytes, waste products out of your blood, and then it pushes the blood back into your body. That's a really simple version of how it works. It does get quite complicated because you need anticoagulants and all this sort of stuff with these things. You also need to, if you want to get by and for it to minimise your life, you've got to be able to needle yourself. So you've got to be able to put needles in your arm. These are not small needles. These are they're called a 15-gauge needle. They're the biggest needles you can get. I think they use them on horses. So that's my experience anyway, I'm sure of it. But you can see through these things. You can see light. They're big. They're big. And some people even use a local anaesthetic to put these needles in because they're so painful. You do become desensitised to them after a while because you don't have a choice. You're going to have this or you're going to die. That's the choice. This goes on for every second day of the week for about 4.5 hours at a time. you go on this machine and just cleans your blood. It's a very crude way of doing it. It's not, there are better things to do with your time. But it has a lot of side effects, again, blood pressure side effects with relationships, side effects with work. People don't want to employ you because you've got to go and have treatment. They don't want anything to do with that. I understand they've got a business they want to run, things like that. But that becomes a problem too, from a work perspective. My first days in dialysis, I met a chap called Graham. Graham basically saved my life. On the first day, Graham saw I was in trouble. I had black and blue up my arm from dialysis. And Graham and I got to know each other, got talking. And one day, Graham got very sick himself. And he was a salt of the earth sort of guy. He saved my life. And one day, he actually died. And, I feel a lot of guilt about that. But Graham taught me a lot of things. And this comes back to this whole thing about adversity, which I think adversity, you might boo me for this, but I think adversity is a fringe benefit that should be taxed. But I'm going to get some boos for that. But you're a pretty tame audience, you haven't booed me. So you obviously don't mind if we add that in. It's funny, you meet these people in your life, they influence you, and they do some marvellous things, I remember Graham actually hugged me before he knew he was dying. And he says like a son that he was going to lose. And it's really hard, These things, you freeze, you're not sure what to do with these people. It's a horrific experience in itself when these relationships go these sort of ways, The other thing is I was watching my parents. I turned up at a transplant for 2 o'clock in the morning, turned up for a transplant. I had all these wires hanging out of me before they were going to transplant me, and I felt immense guilt that my parents were watching me there. I wasn't worried about me, actually. I was worried about the guilt that I had about them watching. It was such a horrible experience. I suffered rejection. I drove a car to hospital once, bleeding all over the car because I was bleeding from a line, blah, blah, blah. But it was an improvement on the car's interior looks, actually. I won't name the manufacturer because they still make cars. Anyway, they make bad interior colours anyway. Music arrived on the scene. It was a very cathartic experience. It helped me get through this. I was able to process things. There was this one there where Paul and I were talking about my music mentor, and there's all these stories to do with deafness and things that probably without outside the scope of this talk anyway. But I really what I wanted to bring it down to was adversity. And stripped away, I think adversity teaches us, all these other things stripped away, it teaches us how to handle these sort of things and process these things properly. And a couple of things I learned from it was you always take note or focus on what's happening. You consolidate your resources and you take calculated risk. And we all have adversity, it's part of our life, you can't change it. But, that's what I'm trying to talk about here, is that these things happen to us and you can get through them. It's a process, it's a tool that can be learnt. And I think it's a light. Light comes from dark. And in fact, you require dark to appreciate light. And I think there's a lot said in that about adversity. And I think we need it in our lives because we need to tax it. It is a fringe benefit. It can teach us things. It builds our character. It builds who we are. I'd just like to say today that my time's run out. I'd like to say that thank you for listening to me. And thank you for lending your ear to me. Thank you.